Hey everyone, it's Brett, and welcome to Behind the Stack, my first author interview for the new year 2025. And I'm really excited to be sitting down today with debut author Tom Lamont with his new book, Going Home. A little bit about Tom. He is an award-winning journalist and one of the founding writers for The Guardian's long reads. He is the interviewer of choice for Adele and Harry Styles, having written in depth about both of these musicians since they emerged in the early 2010s. He's been a regular correspondent for American GQ. He lives in North London with his wife and two children. Going Home is his debut novel. So enjoy this episode of Behind the Stack. So thank you so much for being here today. I absolutely loved your book, and so I'm so thrilled that you're here. And also, I should just say thank you to the wonderful Jenny Jackson, who was instrumental. And she sent me this, and she said, you have to read this. And it's funny because had been following the Guardian list, of which you were one of the 10 best new novelists of 2024 to watch, and I was obsessed with that list. And I've read all but I think 3 of them now, and one of them I couldn't get or something, and I have 2 more that I haven't read yet, but it's a fantastic group of authors.
Yeah, it's like it feels a bit like the arbitrary date they give to your release date of your book kind of groups you with a slice of it, with a generational slice, and it's quite fun to sort of work out through your first year who your peers are, and I guess in a way, you'll always be connected to them. It's like the class of 2024 or 2025. And I guess, I'll always sort of have that lovely like filament connecting me to those 10 other writers.
Really, like, what a great group. So congratulations.
I'm glad you know Jenny, and that was the link here. Because I mean, I've sort of slowly realizing how lucky I've been to have such a rounded figure be shepherding this book out to an American audience. She's this incredible editor with a starry reputation, and she's absolutely seen the process from the other side, from the writer, from the author's perspective, having written, published an incredibly successful book herself. And it's I feel like she's this sort of incredible resource for a newbie like me to be able to sort of tap into. I just love picking her brain.
Yeah, and she's just a lovely person beyond that too, which is like the other plus to it. So for our listeners or our viewers, whoever people are consuming this today, do you have an elevator pitch for the book?
Sure. So we're in an elevator and I'm describing to you the basics. Yeah,
exactly. And it can be, if you want, this could be a very tall building. So
okay, so we've got a few floors, maybe like a Vegas casino sort of thing.
That's exactly right.
My debut novel is called Going Home. I guess the story starts from the perspective of a young man in a Londoner called Teo, who goes home to the North London suburbs where he grew up for what he thinks will be a pretty routine weekend care visit to see his ailing dad, a guy called Vic. But while he's there, something dramatic happens. He ends up having to stay much longer than he intended. And he ends up having to care for a 2-year-old boy, a kid called Joel, who finds himself without really anyone else to look after him. And the story from that point revolves around Joel, who looks after him and how. There's Teo, a sort of reluctant parental figure stepping into an absence. There's Teo's best friend, Ben, the least reliable person in his message groups, a bit of a hedonist and a narcissist, kind of a bloody nightmare. Someone you would say at the outset is just about the least equipped to be involved in the raising of a impressionable, vulnerable child, but who nevertheless forces himself to get involved. Vic, the father figure, who has some regrets about his own parenting journey, his own time as a father in his 30s and 40s, takes the arrival of Joel in his house as a kind of second opportunity to try again as a parent. And then there's a fourth adult character, the rabbi in this North London community these characters live in. Her name's Sybil. She's friendly with Vic. She gets to know the younger men, and she, in her own way, becomes involved in Joel's continuing care over about a year. They move through the seasons. They have some lows. They have highs. They have a lot of fun. I feel like The book is sort of rippled with melancholy, but on the whole, I wanted a joyful book. I wanted an uplifting book. I wanted a book that was honest about the granular experience of parenting from the perspective of entirely unprepared people. That's how I experienced becoming a parent. I got run over by it. I got hit by the truck of it overnight and learned everything as I went, as a lot of people do, as my parents probably did, as your parents probably did. Any number of parenting stories, as different as they are in their specifics, generally involve headlong education in how not to let a child die. And really that to me is the sort of Joel, the 2-year-old, is the beating heart of the story, and the care, the need for him to be looked after, to be raised, to be steered, to be entertained, to be fed, to be picked up, to be put back together again. That's the thrust of the book. That's what it's about.
And we've arrived. It's funny because yesterday, when I was writing down some stuff from this, there was an article. Now I'm sounding so like Hollywood. There was an article in the Hollywood Reporter talking about some of the state of current television right now, and it was talking about 3 television shows in particular: Shrinking, which is a show that I actually work on, and then this show Somebody Somewhere that's on HBO, and then the last one was A Man Inside, which is a new Ted Danson show on Netflix, and that's set in a retirement community. But the article was talking about bridging the comedy with melancholy and sadness and the success of that with all 3 of these shows. But it made me think of this because one of the things that the journalist said in the end, what works and what this is too, is there is a collective empathy without slipping into sentimentality. And that made a lot of sense with this to me. Because it really could have been maudlin and also kind of cloying and sweet with the son. And I feel like you really avoid all that in such a great way that it is very moving, but it's also so funny. I mean, there's parts of it that are like really, really, really funny with these characters, and also hugely identifiable, like you just said, for anybody who's been a parent to be dropped in it.
Thank you for saying all that, Brett. And I do want it to be. I always knew if I was going to write about parenting small children, there was sort of a few hurdles I knew I was placing in front of myself that I'd have to get over. One of them was I absolutely wanted this to be a novel that people could enjoy, whatever their own engagement with small children, with parenting or not. And secondly, I just absolutely policed myself against, as well as I could, police myself against letting the 2-year-old boy become cloying, because kids are, as in life, in fiction, can be a bit of a nightmare. There's many a book I've sent sort of spinning across a room because I just can't bear the child. I don't believe them.
Yeah.
I've never met one like these fictional kids, and I really, really challenged myself to try and get down, essentially, my son when he was 2, and the extraordinary and utterly ordinary ways that he approached the world, the sort of this strange middle state between being expressive and baffling, between verbal and non-verbal, between independence and total dependence. And that was it was a very particular moment in childhood I wanted to capture, kind of a part of childhood I think none of us really remember in ourselves, just slightly before long-term memory kicks in, but which it's so beguiling when you meet it, that age. This is sort of that rove. I guess in England we call them toddlers, and because they toddle, they go everywhere. They're impossible to keep up with. They have their first taste of motion, of exploration, of naughtiness, and they are at their most exhausting and at their most magical. And so all of that I try to bind up in Joel, but I hope it is a story that anyone can read and get something out of, because it's also about the other end of parenting, the saying goodbye to one's own parents. And
sure,
that is something that, for better or worse, almost everyone will go through, has been through. It came out of a time in my life as I was writing it where I felt very much sort of arm's distance from both. My little boy was getting older, my dad was dying, and it was all happening at the same time. And at a certain point, they were essentially the same type of human. Their needs were the same. To care for them was really similar. And I just wanted to put some fiction in that place, that strange moment in a life when you can see almost both ends of it. You're meeting two people are almost meeting on a journey in and out.
Yeah, it's a weird, because I lost my father passed when my son was first born. In fact, my parents were out visiting in Los Angeles. It's the first time that he had seen him, and he died that week while he was here. And it's such a strange moment to all of a sudden the journey as a parent, but you're also still a son, and to go through these, you're almost sandwiched between these two realities of learning to or discovering how to parent yourself while also watching your father, in this case for you. It's a really, it's weird, isn't it? It's very strange.
It's a deeply weird phase. Because I think a lot of people, me included, learn a new type of forgiveness for your own parents when you become a parent yourself. You suddenly understand it. You understand so much more about the decisions they made, the ways they frustrated you, the limits that were put on your life, the roller coaster of the journey. And I'm sorry, in your case, that's heartbreaking as a situation to be in, because you were probably learning all these things about dadhood in this case, the mix and the mess of that, and you lost him incredibly quickly, too quickly. Well, in my case, it prompted new conversations with my father. It made me much more. It was like you suddenly saw the answers on the back of the page. You suddenly saw your own childhood in greater depth in the round.
Absolutely. And I think you have you have, if not an understanding completely, but a kind of reality of everybody's just human, and they were probably trying to do the best that they were capable of doing in whatever circumstances they were given at this time. Now, you said that the character of Vic, some of it was inspired by your father and that situation. And I read another interview with you where you said, your father was not a meddler like Vic is. Do you think if your dad read it, he would have recognized himself? Or do you think he would have liked the character of Vic?
That's a really lovely question. I have thought about it because he died. I mean, I know the page I was writing when he died. I wrote it kind of chronologically, and I can sort of see. I've got a book in front of me now, and I can sort of see the moment in the book where he passed away. I write every day. I wrote that morning of his death, the day he died, and I wrote the day after. So I never had to. We knew he was dying, and I sort of knew that the time track I was on, he was probably never going to read it, and that did allow a certain freedom in writing a character that drew certainly heavily on his biography and his personal experiences in life. As I write in the acknowledgements, I made some pretty chunky changes to the character of this father figure of Vic, because in order to make the plot go, I needed my fictional Vic to be a meddler, as you quoted. He needs to get involved a few times, not always to the advantage of everyone concerned. And my dad was much more passive. He was a chill bean, and and he would never have risked overturning things in a similar way. Although he was frustrated a lot of the time, like Vic is. Vic doesn't feel that he really hit his full potential professionally, and he's got, I think, a lot of frustrations and questions about various personal journeys he's been on. He had a hard upbringing. These are all things I borrowed wholesale from my own father. So your question was, what would he make of it? Would he recognize himself, and would he like it? I know that he would brim with pride just about the fact of the book and about the fact of it being published. And I think he would get a kick out of certain sentences, certain references. I don't think he would recognize certain parts of the descriptions, and I think he would be alarmed at other observations, as you or I would when our children grow up and write about us. But I think he would like the character. I think he, as a lot of people have done, which a lot of readers have fallen for Vic, which I'm really pleased about, because he makes a mess of things a few times, and he doesn't always sort of cover himself in glory or earn maximum sympathy. But I feel like readers have bought into him and have understood kind of where he's coming from. And I think my dad, who wasn't a terrifically hungry reader, was very empathetic and gave me a very solid grounding in trying to think about things through other people's experiences, just try and walk in other people's shoes, which is the root of empathy, which is the root of being a human, really. And he was a great teacher of that. And I think he would vibe with Vic. Yeah, I want to think so. Luckily, I've never really had to find out, though. I don't know how other authors go through this. I mean, you've met them, you've interviewed them. When you capture people or aspects of people or slivers of people and put them on the page and they're still alive to read it, what must that be like? What's the next Sunday lunch like?
I think I'd be more concerned if I was the character of Ben. If I was the person that you had modeled Ben off of, then I'd been like, hey, what, really?
Well, a lot of readers of the book have told me there were Bens in their own lives, and
there's Ben in everybody's life. That's the thing.
And a lot of them are dated Bens. A lot of the women are dated Bens, and
yep.
were kind of still half burned, half sort of yearning for him. I think.
Sure. No, he's incredibly charming and just incredibly self-involved, which is kind of what his appeal is, too.
Well, I think I'm not like that at all. And I think there is an appeal for passive people, for quiet people, for introverts, to have an extrovert, to have the energy of someone a little narcissistic in their life, because it's so propulsive, it's so exciting. You pay the consequences, but you also just get to go along for the ride a bit, And I think I learned writing this book that in a narrative that involves multiple characters, in a novel like this one, you really want a few fuel sources, a few sources of propulsion, of energy. And I really, I remember kind of loving settling into another Ben chapter when I was deep underway on the writing of this, because I would tingle with a bit of that energy, the bit of that energy that I don't otherwise possess, a kind of like may care.
Are you more of a Teo?
Teo, so Teo's quite dutiful, quite auxiliary. If we were going to enter the sort of manosphere blog terminology, he is a beta, and has recognized this and resigned himself to it. But the world don't go around without betas. Childcare, which is a huge part of this book, it only happens with the responsible, with the dutiful, with the people responsible.
You're right.
You can't tell the story of even a moderately successful parenting journey without one or more dutiful people. And so I wanted to try and tease out through Teo's journey and Teo's story some of the drama, some of the glamour, some of the grandeur in that. With a 2-year-old kid, you have to be there in the middle of the night, rubbing the back, opening the plaster, opening the Band-Aid. You have to be telling them the same story, reassuring the same fears on a Tuesday morning. You are pushing those swings again and again and again. If that doesn't get done, the job doesn't get done. I've always been quite feminine, I think, in my viewpoints. I'm lucky. I've had really strong women in my life, great friends. I've been with my wife for a long time, and I think there's lots of mistakes or things I did as a young parent that I, possibly wouldn't do again with experience. But I know that I came into it very much like bolstered by not being a kind of wild, uncontainable, extremely masculine dad who just couldn't bear the idea of domesticity. There was a big part of me that could and would do that and try and enjoy the journey of that and the granular experience of that. And I wanted to get that down. I would love to think that 1 or 2 readers from this who were unsure about their capabilities, unsure about the limitations of parenting, would read this book and see that it's its own world. It's the next adventure. It's a really amazing thing to go through.
Oh my God, it's the best. And when you're in it, you're like, dear God, how will I ever get through this? Because there is no manual for everything is so individual. It's literally like, hang on, here we go, because you don't know what you're getting in any facet of it.
I've come to think that parenting, the reason it's so hard to put yourself into it before it happens, it's kind of like illness or bereavement. It's the totality of it. You can't.
That's
It's
it.
very hard for the human brain to imagine 24 hours non-stop indefinitely. You can imagine an hour of stress. You can imagine a day of pain. It's very hard to, or pleasure. And it's very hard to just see the sort of infinity of parenting, or certainly what feels like infinity unfurling in front of you. And no matter how much I tried in the build-up, it wasn't till day one, minute one that you
Right.
start to understand.
Yeah, the intellectualizing it is a completely different thing than what actually takes place. So I'm just so curious, what was the genesis for you for the story? Like, where did this come up?
Yeah, so I'm 42. We talked about at the beginning about that generational awareness, that idea that you know who your peers are coming out as debut authors at the same time. And so I feel kind of like a geriatric debutant in a way, being in my early 40s. But that's partly because I'm a journalist in my daily life. That's been my career, shaped a lot of my personality and formed it's been the backbone of my adult life. But I have been trying to write novels for a long time, and I've written a couple to completion that didn't quite work, weren't really it, never found homes, were never bought. And so I say all this to explain that this book, Going Home, which is my first published book, is very much the first novel I've finished that felt right, it worked, felt real, true. And partly that was because the previous work I was trying to do was very much drawn from kind of a offcut and overspill from journalism. I would be on I'd do a rich piece of reporting, spend a lot of time diving into a subject to write a long piece of narrative nonfiction. And I would be left with this kind of pool of excess and interests and questions and fascinations. And I tried a couple of times to work some of that into novel length fiction. There was something about it, as my agent would tell me, or editors would say when they were regretfully rejecting these manuscripts, something about that just wasn't working. And you asked where this book came from, and it really came from some frank conversations with my agent, Jane Finnegan, and with a couple of editors in London, including the editor who finally bought this book, Fede Andonino, where they basically said the bits in you that work as a fiction writer are actually quite far from the journalist in you. And they're intimate, they're quiet, they're close, they're domestic, they're interpersonal, they're about people, small groups of people. These are the bits that work. Not the societal howls where you're wearing your journalistic hat and you want to point out all the ills. And it was just so clarifying for me to hear that. I mean, depressing initially, and sort of like as good a punch in the stomach as I've ever had, probably. And after the sort of ache went away and I was able to sort of figuratively stand up straight again, I just got to work on something totally different that was very close to home. I was absolutely drawn from lived experience, was set in the part of London where I grew up. It's about secular Judaism and losing your faith, experiences I've had or been adjacent to. It's about, as we've discussed, a little boy who, I've had one. And it's about the way friendship kind of evolves and sometimes deteriorates from school onwards as you yourself leave childhood and enter adulthood. But they said, keep going, kid, or some version of that. And from that meeting, I went away and wrote for 18 months every day, didn't stop, every morning, didn't stop. And where I was writing from was just totally different. It was from the heart and the spine. It wasn't really so much the head. And I could feel from the process of it that it was right. It was more right. And it was the first time when I finished it and revised it and read and revised and read and revised and handed something in, I just felt confident in what it was. I felt it was real. It wasn't like scraps. It felt like something. Even though there was loads of work still to be done at that point, it felt like it held together. And that's because I think it's art. It's got to come from you don't have as a journalist, you're constantly leaning on the rails of fact and place and time and moving through time, and a novel can be anything. It's ephemeral, and you make the internal logic, you build the universe however big or small it is, and so it has to come from a different place. I think I guess I spent my 30s making mistakes that helped me understand where it has to come from. And if it's had that effect on you, as I'm delighted to hear you say it has, that's because of that time. I think that's because of that that learning process that I'm glad to have gone through.
One of the things you mentioned and I wanted to ask you about was the whole Judaism thing. And you have these characters who are all Jewish, and it's not a plot point necessarily or anything like that. I mean, one of the characters, Sybil, is a rabbi, and she's such a fantastic character that I wanted to talk a little bit more about in a second. I know that your mother was Jewish and your father was Scottish Catholic. So can you talk about like the decision to make this? Again, it wasn't anything that was integral necessarily, but it's a part of all their lives.
Yeah. I felt slightly like I hadn't really read it before, I suppose. My mum was raised in a pretty liberal, pretty secular Jewish family, a massive North London family, very close, very loving, still enormous numbers of us. And my dad was raised in Care, in Scotland. And at the time, being raised in Care where he grew up meant being raised by nuns, within the Catholic Church. And that did it for him in religion. He was very circumspect about what he would say or the memories he was willing to tap into from this time. It was an enormous and tragic stretch of time in his childhood from a horrendously young age. But as a journalist, I had the extremely strange experience of happening upon a government report about the care home he was in that was put together retrospectively by the Scottish government. So I did get to find out some of what he'd been through. And at the very least of it, that would, I understood why he was a lapsed Catholic, for sure. I think he when he met my mum, he was pretty deep into his life. He was in his 30s and he'd never really had, he'd never really had a biological family, and he'd had some pieces of adopted families and bits of experience, but I know he was magnetized to what my mum had, which was dozens of people, a warmth, spirit and energy of a big cacophonous family. And he kind of had this strange non-converting conversion. He never took up the religion. He never tried to apply for that process you can go through to convert. He just sort of hung around it and I think liked it and took what he took out of it. And so my brother and I were raised in quite a funny kind of like religious way, where my mum's family were initially more religious than they then subsequently were. So they were on their own journey, kind of out of faith. My dad came colliding in from the side as a kind of doubter and a skeptic, but someone who loved the community and who loved the warmth and the ceremony and the occasion of it. And we were sort of raised in this funny sort of in-out space, very culturally Jewish, certainly in our family lives, but religion here and there. I was bar mitzvahed, which is a fairly major religious rite of passage to go through. And at the same time, that was more or less the end of my sort of academic religious engagement with the synagogue I grew up in. And all of which is a long way of saying I wanted to put some fiction in that space, in that kind of middle space of being to the side of a religion, to being sort of half warmed by it and half turned away. And the characters in their own different ways are all like that. There's a part of them that's in and there's a part of them that's out.
Well, I think one of the things, it's interesting because I've thought about this a lot, and my business partner is Jewish, and so many of my closest friends are as well. And they're at all different various levels of involvement. But I've always felt like Judaism and the Jewish faith and the Jewish people, that it does engender such a sense of family and community in a way that many other religions don't, at least certainly I think here in the States. And I've always been somewhat envious of that, even through holidays or whatever. There's just such an incredible sense of community that's fostered and engendered. And it's so prevalent here. I kept thinking of like this whole idea of the kind of it takes a village in terms of raising a child, but also just with that particular community. And that's why Sybil to me is such a great and wonderful character, because I love that you have this person who is a religious leader who, arguably we think they are going to have all the answers and this unwavering faith in whatever it is, but they're also human and they're also faced with the fact of having doubts about certain things and why things are happening the way they are. I just think she's such a great character because she's so real and so human.
Thank you. She was the character, nervous isn't quite the right word, but I was apprehensive about it because she's the only woman I fully inhabit in this book. I think that was a slight problem of courage on my part, and it's something I definitely stress in the future. The other characters are male, but it was partly a hesitancy because I just didn't want to get her wrong, and I approached it partly by pulling from women I'm close to, my wife included, and partly there's a lot of me at 40 in her because she's 10 years older than the other characters. I'm writing sort of as an author, I'm tapping into my memory of what it was like to be in my early 30s to write the two main male characters in the book. And with Sybil, she's 10 years on from them, and I get to be sort of me now, almost sort of checking in with the youngins, and just having that little bit more sense of myself. I mean, in her case, she's having these doubts. It's the same tragedy that prompts the dilemma of Joel's care that prompts Sybil to question her faith. And although she is going through something that would be traumatic to happen to a person who's chosen to be a religious leader as their calling, to lose your faith, that's going to be up there in the most difficult things you can go through. But I very much wanted her to, concurrent with that, know who she is. She's someone who knows who she is, as I think I know who I am in my 40s in a way that I haven't done before necessarily. So I'm delighted to hear you responded to her like that.
Sure. It's also a real testament to kind of the staying power of faith, because having something that would shake your faith or make you really start to think, and then to kind of dig in and say, as she describes it, or as you describe in the book, she lost a means of fluid conversation with God. I loved that line. So it's kind of finding your way back, and what is it that helps you find your way back? And I think so much of that is then becomes rooted in her interactions with Joel and Teo and with all of them, in terms of finding a sense of community again and finding a sense of purpose and all of that, which I loved. And I want to jump back to Joel and Teo and going back to something we were talking about in the beginning, which is kind of the totality of raising a kid. And something it just stuck with me so much. And I reread it last night because I just found it so moving. This is such a simple thing, but it's the nighttime routines. And it was it's so right on. And I remember sitting in a rocking chair in my son's room every night, and he would be talking and you would just hear him breathing. And I kept thinking, like, please just go down, please just go down, please just go down. And wanting one of two things happen. I wanted him to fall asleep before I fell asleep in the chair, because arguably then you wake up and your neck is stiff and you're like, God damn it, I've just wasted the entire evening, because all you want is to get them to a point where you could get down and go downstairs and maybe watch something on TV for a half hour before you fall into sleep. Yeah, sure. Right. And so I just love that. It's so beautifully captured. And I just that's not even a question. It's just a statement that you captured that so well. And I think for everyone who's done that with a kid, it's just that moment of like, wow. And the moment you think they're done, I used to remember slowly getting out of the chair and thinking to myself, please don't creak, please don't creak, please don't creak. And one foot hits the floor and all of a sudden he'd be like, Papa, yeah, I'm here. I'm here,
buddy. I know, it's like, you and you can't sound exasperated. It's the one tone of voice that's guaranteed to like bring them right out of the depth.
Yes.
I always thought of it as like, they're like, they need I think I put this in the book, they need an escort to sleep. They need yes. They need to be marched to sleep as if you're the police taking them to the station. And yes. You're sort of pushing their heads down to get them into the back of the cop car. And like, they can't be left alone in those moments. But they kind of want to get there. You definitely want to get there. And you get to know every floorboard, right?
God.
You get to know the creak of every chair. But you also know like tones, and on their part, there's the snuffles and the rhythm of the breathing. On your part, that just the wrong kind of voice can snap them back out. You're looking to create this strange. It's almost like a trick. It's like a con. It's like a long con you're trying to play on them to get them to let go of the rails of consciousness and just drift off. But the rewards are enormous, because then you've got a few hours, you've got the evening.
Yes. That's exactly right. Well, Tom, I could literally sit here and talk to you all day. I just want to thank you again. I do have the book here. The book is fantastic. It's a homecoming novel. It's a family novel, both about found family and given family, and also a book about faith and childhood and parenting. So
And
please get it, pick it up.
and polar bears.
And polar bears, yes, yes. Like, this is what I love so much, because people will look at this cover and not understand it exactly right away, but the resonance of this is fantastic. So congratulations for your success and for all of this that's coming with it. It's great. And good luck with it all.
Thank you for having me, Brett. This has been really fun.